On the website, if you go to the COVID tab, you can see 3 exemplars, one for elementary, one for middle, and one for high school. And those give you illustrations about what this could all look like in the COVID era. But remember all the work that you've done to date in building this. Your CI3T model represents not one more thing for a district or a school to do. And you're hearing people say there's too much on my plate. Remember, CI3T is the plate. It is the way to organize all the happenings for all, for some, and for a few. And so some of you are looking at building this for the first time tonight. Some of you are, advanced implementers who literally have been doing this for 9 years. And we've got some people on the call that are even in the process of training it. So if we can think about this as the structure, and the structure itself is flexible, when you open those exemplars, you're going to see some shaded boxes, and that shaded box represents what those roles and responsibilities would look like if you are in remote instruction. And the white ones are going to look like what is happening during in-person instruction. I'm going to show you those in just a moment. And whatever your current social skills component is, stick with that. It is really important right now to use the plan that you have, because remember, you've already spent time introducing a set of skills to your kids, like soft skills. And go ahead and click to the next slide, Katie. When you think about things like how you're going to teach soft skills like self-awareness, self-regulation, advocating for yourself, if your commitment already was to second step, then in whether it's in person as shown in the white box, or if it is in the gray box for remote instruction, you're gonna want that content to be the same. And that's part of how you're building clarity for the kids. The lessons and the things are gonna be the same, whether you're at home or you're in person for instruction, those skills are gonna be useful to you. You'll also notice things like teaching expectations. That absolutely wants to be a practice. We had a great coaching call today with a district from Vermont this morning, and it was wonderful. In addition to the adjustments that they made for their in-person expectations, they have a whole thing about like how they're going to teach kids to make sure that they're properly wearing a mask, because we know if they're hanging on your ear or serving as a chin warmer, they're not doing their intended function. And all these people that are showing up with Panera like this, that is not helpful. So we want to make sure that kids know that, I'm wearing my mask to keep you safe. Will you please wear your mask to keep me safe? And here's how you do it. So it's not just the how, but it's the why. And as you're thinking about procedures for teaching, what I want you to think about for academics, for behavior, and for social skills, all those pieces are already in your plan. And you've got clarity on what are those low intensity strategies looking like in the academic area? How am I going to respond to kids with challenging behaviors, like in the acting out, using the acting out cycle? How am I going to weave in these social skills? That whole thing, those are the procedures that are going to be taught. And when I teach it, it's not just teaching the students, it's teaching the adults, and then acknowledging those people. So how do I recognize the adults for the tremendous lift that they're being asked to do? And then how do I acknowledge the kids who are engaging as well? And when we think about using our data, we're going to have some clear advice for you tonight about, like, some people are asking us, should we still monitor fidelity? And we have other people, like Stacey Kramer on this call, her question was, how are we going to do it? Because we know we have to do it, because we don't want to say a child needs more than, whatever this tier 1 experience is, if we don't even know if it's happening. So we're going to need to look at data like attendance now more than ever. Just because a kid signs up for remote instruction doesn't mean it's happening. It's just like a gym membership at this time. You can continue to pay the $39.95 or the $139.95 a month. It doesn't mean you're going there. So when we look ahead on the next slide, we think about procedures for teaching in the coming times. One of the things I'm really going to encourage you to check out with your coach tonight is have a conversation about expectations. When you look at the expectations that are posted in person, if you're there already or getting ready to transition kids back after a sustained period of time, ask yourself, do those reflect what you really mean right now? And really, bathroom behavior, we need to have clarity for kids on, do you have rules like if there's more than 3 people or 5 people, then take a pause, wait outside? Do you have clarity on mask wearing and social distancing? And I don't think this is the time to invest money reprinting these, and that is why God made the sticky note. So get the big sticky note things, put those expectations on there, slap it up, teach it. And then tonight, you're also going to have an opportunity to look at those digital expectations. And so when we move ahead, looking forward at how we're going to teach these expectations, remember that there's other resources other than just ci3t.org. On pbis.org, Katie's going to show you an illustration on another approach to teaching expectations for remote instructions. The ones we're giving you are focused on that instructional moment. On here, it's even more broken down about like, how do you want kids to come into the classroom space, engage in whole class and individual? How do you want them to do end-to-one? And you decide what is reasonable for you right now. And on the next slide, you're going to see an image of something that I mentioned just briefly earlier. You're going to see this whole idea about the integrated lesson plan. And one of the features of that is those 3 domains. And I'm not suggesting you ask teachers to write a billion lesson plans right now, but I am asking you to have them think intentionally. What am I trying to accomplish academically? What social skill can I weave into this instruction right now? Like being empathetic. So when somebody bursts into tears over the fact that they can't find their blue Smurf pen, sparkly marker, whatever the hell it is, remember that there's other baggage that's coming behind that. And there's nobody that's coming back without some vulnerability. So we want to make sure that kids, that our first response is to show empathy. We also are going to want to have clear behavioral expectations, and then we're going to use those low intensity strategies, such those at the top of the page, to help support the engagement, minimize disruption. And so we don't want to do these things in a siloed approach. So like if your plan might be that you're going to do your 15-minute morning meeting when kids log in, you're going to teach a lesson, but let's not stop there. Let's build it into the discussions of the day. And that is our integrated lesson plan. On the next slide, you're also going to see additional information that I mentioned previously about homes, like helping families set up for success at home. This is an infographic that goes over some of the resources, and your coach in your breakout room will walk you through some of these. To start from the very beginning, think about like, is that family understand the schedule about how it's going to work? And if you have to change, remember that that has the ripple effect. As you all know, some of you on this call are working parents. And so you're all manage my own and trying to remember that you have a spouse. So remember that it's complex. On the next slide, you'll also see some conversation about, click, 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 very good, thank you, about continued professional learning. So again, as you're walking through this today, you might decide to invite people to access some of these resources right here. These are tried and true. There's the old professional learning materials are right on there. And just so that you're aware, the steps that are here in in-person instruction, it's the same exact number of steps in the remote instruction, like how to do that remotely, that you'll find on the COVID page.
So when we talk about reinforcing, I think it's very tempting to go straight to thinking about reinforcing students. We're very used to in CI3T and PBIS providing behavior-specific praise and acknowledging students for meeting expectations. However, before we even think about acknowledging students, I think what a great time now more than ever to acknowledge the work that your colleagues and leaders and everyone around you is doing to support kids and their families. Obviously, this has been a very challenging time in education and in our country broadly. And so I think one of the great ways that we can show our appreciation is just by making simple acknowledgements, not even for going above and beyond, but for people showing up and doing their job every day. Because we know people are just maxed out, and them being there and having a positive attitude, that is worth acknowledging and praising. And so one of the things that our team has done is to put these like little virtual postcards on our website, which you can find in a couple of places, and our coaches will be happy to guide you to where you can find those. But whether you use our template or just a quick email, or maybe your school has a procedure where you do, kind of shout out of the week, but just shouting out people that don't always get an acknowledgement in public, or a private praise statement to someone that maybe would appreciate more of just a quiet word of acknowledgement. Now is really a great time just to say thank you for doing what you're doing, because we really need everyone to stay strong and keep doing what they're doing. And that acknowledgement can really fuel people's fire to keep going. So we want to make sure that we're not just thinking about how we can reinforce students, but also how we can reinforce our colleagues, because that's just really important right now more than ever. And then if you'll take me to the next slide, Katie. So actually one of our partners online with us right now, Melissa at Sunflower, they've done some excellent work around brainstorming how we can acknowledge students and just coming up with really creative ideas for doing that. So we'll talk a little bit more about some ideas for how to come up with menus and ideas for reinforcing students in just a moment. But one of the big challenges right now is just logistics. Like, how do we acknowledge students in a way that's connected to the way we would do it if we were in normal school, face to face? You know, typically we would teach expectations, we would acknowledge students verbally for meeting them using behavior specific praise, and sometimes we would pair it with that ticket. Maybe you call it best bucks or a pride ticket or whatever you call it in your school. Right now, there are some issues with that, right? If we're in online learning, we don't see our students face to face, and so suddenly that interaction becomes a little bit harder to manage. How do we make that acknowledgement clear? How do we help students know that they've received the acknowledgement? And potentially, a lot of students, the real power in that is that they can use that acknowledgement to access something that they like. So how do we make that work in the remote learning environment? Additionally, when we're worried about spreading of viruses or any other concerns like that, where passing paper materials maybe has a concern for, you know, a little bit more contact than we're looking for right now. So when we're back in like hybrid learning, some people are still thinking, well, maybe we're not ready to go back to using paper tickets yet. We need some stopgap. And so we've been thinking about as a team how we can provide some continuity and some guidance for creating a system that would let you provide reinforcement in a way that's connected to and consistent with CI3T. So right now on your screen, you can see a few things. On the bottom right, you see an infographic. It's called Tips for Providing Reinforcement in Virtual Settings. You can actually find that on the COVID page right now. And what it does is it gives you 6 kind of big ideas for things that you want to keep in mind as you're planning for how to reinforce students in this untraditional time. And just really briefly, some of those ideas are things like making sure that you're still teaching expectations, making sure that you call your acknowledgement the same thing. So if your ticket has a specific name, even if you're using some other system to provide that ticket or help track the providing of the ticket, still call it the same thing, because that name has power. And when we're using the same name, we're making things consistent, and we're programming for generalization, which is just a fancy way to help kids connect their experiences now to what they remember from when they were at school before. And when they get back to school, the procedures that you're using will build on each other. So you're helping yourself and you're helping them to connect through all the different kinds of instruction that your students might receive this year by keeping things as similar as possible. Additionally, still using behavior specific praise, which may be verbal or could be written. That's really important to make sure that we're still acknowledging students and telling them why they're being acknowledged. And then making sure that not just the classroom teacher can provide that acknowledgement. And this is a tricky one, because as soon as we go to a digital system or anything like that, suddenly it becomes easy to fall into the trap of only the classroom teacher can provide that acknowledgement, which means that if you have interventionists, be they title teachers, special education teachers, paraprofessionals, anyone like that, if they don't have access to the system, suddenly we're teaching students that they really only need to attend and think about expectations with the people that are acknowledging them. So we don't want to accidentally set students up for that idea about expectations and acknowledgement. So we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to provide that. So with some of those guidelines in mind, what our team did is we were looking for some simple solutions to help build a system like this. And on the left side of your screen, you can see a Google form that's part of a templated system that we've built, and it's accessible on ci3t.org. And basically what it consists of, and Katie, if you'll hit to the next slide, it consists of a very simple spreadsheet template that you can click on a link on ci3t.org. It'll take you to this Google Drive template, and you can make a copy to your own Google Drive. And then if you go to the next slide, Katie, it also comes with an individual or a customizable student sheet that basically you would make one for each student in your class. And you can put your expectations there. You can make it look however you want it to look so that it's linked in with your school's visual identity. But what happens is when you hit submit on that Google form, the number on this Google sheet automatically goes up by 1. And what that does is it helps students to see, A, that they're being acknowledged. It happens in real time, so it's similar to receiving that ticket. It's just in a digital world. But it also kind of gives them a customizable spot that helps them connect the acknowledgement to the expectations, which I think is really important. So if you're interested in that, those materials are all on the resources for COVID-19 tab. And we've made a step-by-step guide for taking these templates and setting them up. We've also made an in-depth video that would take you through the whole process. So if you're interested in piloting that for your class or for your school, those resources are there for you to use and customize as you like. And if you'll take me to the next slide, Katie.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
I appreciate that. And Mark and his partner Haley have done a great job of doing that initial draft and setup. And I know some schools we had the opportunity to work with last week already got started on that. Another thing that is starting to come up is like that explicitness. And I noticed that Melissa just posted something in the chat. In your conversations today, be sure to brainstorm your idea about like, what are you doing for your virtual reinforcement? And we've put some ideas that are free access ideas, things that could be done in Zoom, things that cost nothing, because we want to be sensitive to that. And so as we head into breakout rooms in just a moment, you're going to see a list of questions that are going to come. When we think about looking at the data for this year, it's the same 30,000 foot view. We absolutely, just like always, in fall and spring, want to make sure that everybody employed in the building has a voice to say, in terms of sociability, here's what I think about our goals right now. Here's what I think about the procedures, meaning what you're asking me to do. And here's how I think it's working. And we know that social validity, like what people think on those things, actually predicts how much they implement. Like when you believe something is a reasonable goal and it feels like an important goal and that the procedures feel feasible, then they're more likely to do it if they think it's going to yield that desired outcome. I am continually impressed with the educational system as a whole for what they are doing to try to figure out how to keep things moving forward. And to that end, it's also important to measure treatment fidelity. So if we say we're doing academics, behavior, and social and emotional well-being, are we really doing it at tier 1? Because we honestly, we don't want to reach out to a parent and say, your child needs more than we have to offer right now. And so we're going to try this tier 2 thing. And so if Heidi has to make that reach out to a parent, then she wants to make sure she can say, here's what fidelity is looking like in our school. And here's what it looks like in my classroom. And here are the things that I've tried. And remember, screening is going to play an important role in this. I want to have a very clear and upfront conversation with you about screening. We are getting hundreds of calls and contacts a week on the idea of systematic screening. And the first sets of questions from people were, should we keep screening? And does it work in the same way? And the God's honest truth is there are no studies of reliability and validity for systematic screening for remote instruction. And that's why we were equally thankful that in addition to the work we're doing with some of you on Project Enhance, we are also working with some of you and others on this project called Project Screen. Even before COVID happened, many of you we know are using the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So it's that 14 item ones, like all the kids you rate across independently, and you use these 2 total scores to look for internalizing and externalizing. And even before this happened, we committed to doing all these extra studies for 3 years with our district partners because it's actually one of the last free access screening tools. And so there are wonderful other screening tools that are commercially available, and they have resources behind them to continue the advances in reliability and validity and bias analyses. But thanks to IES, we're going to be able to do those same things with behavior screenings. And then when all this happened, we actually contacted to expand the questions to see, and how does it work in the COVID era? So on our website, on that screening tab, you will actually see, if you click on the accordion that opens up the SRSS-IE, you'll see an updated Excel spreadsheet with the same questions plus 2 new questions of how is this child receiving instruction during this period? And Katie, if you have the option, could you go ahead and open up that website and scroll down and find that Excel tab? And if you find it, great. And if not, no pressure. But we asked that question about how is this kid getting access to instruction, remote, hybrid, or in person? The next thing we asked is the child a regular attender? So whatever the expectation is for attendance, if they're on an AB schedule or they're at home or whatever, are they showing up regularly? And I'm going to show you where to find it right now. So when she clicks on systematic screening, if you scroll down, you're going to see a little accordion. And that accordion is going to have the same normal 12 questions. And there's a little link for that Excel spreadsheet. Oops, just a little bit higher, Katie. There we go. It's like a blue line. My old eyes will help you find it. There you go. And so in that Excel spreadsheet, just know that that's there. And I know like in some of the districts, your district leaders already have it set up. And the intent there is to get that information, because what we will be doing with our partners is we're actually going to be doing additional reliability and validity studies to see how it's working in the COVID era. So right now, we are encouraging people to do 3 things as they screen. The very first thing, which is on this infographic, and we will show you this because we want you to feel comfortable going back to share with your buildings and for you yourself to think about, okay, here's what I need to know about screening. The first thing that we want to think about is I do encourage you to continue screening. And just like some people on this call, lean in. Like if you have opportunities to partner with people to figure out how it's working, take advantage of those. Like right now, we were on a coaching call last week where people just can log in. It's just like a place to drop in. We've already had meetings, like group meetings with more than a dozen principals this week alone to say, I want to be in that study. Like I want to know how it's working in my district, because people are curious as to know how it is functioning. So on that little infographic, and you'll talk about this in your breakout, we want you to continue screening, but engage in professional learning. And we may find out that as long as kids are regular attenders, maybe those scores, those 2 scores are truly still predictive. We may find out we have to wait till later in the school year to screen. The answer is we don't know. But what I can tell you is that screening, if we do not screen right now, we miss the opportunity to find kids with internalizing issues. And that is really problematic right now. Really problematic right now, because even before COVID happened, if you were to take a picture of the United States of America, about 20% of all school age kids before this happened already had mild to severe internalizing or externalizing issues. So internalizing is like shy, anxious, withdrawn, and externalizing is non-compliant, defiant, and there's overlap. And the correlation coefficients are 0.52, which in real life means that there's about 25% overlap. And now NASS, the National Association of School Psychologists, is anticipating those percentage of kids to more than double. So that means we need to be able to see like what we're managing for the school as a whole. And you are not, when those screening data are going to come back, they're not going to immediately be used to put kids into tier 2 and tier 3. That they're going to be used with multiple sources of data to inform instruction. So we're going to look at things with your screening data, like attendance. Was the kid a regular attender? Like if you're benchmarking on Ames Web, how are they doing in terms of academic performance? We need to take that whole picture of that whole look of kids, and then we need to see where do we need to start. And you may find that, and it's highly likely, our first action plan is probably going to need to be at tier 1. If you wind up having like 20 or 30% of your kids with high levels of internalizing issues or high levels of any kind of behavior challenging, thank goodness you've already got a validated social skills curriculum. You've got it ready to go. So you're going to go in, like Melissa and Jess are going to go pull through their positive action lessons and see what was the appropriate content to address this right now. Stacy Kramer and her crew are going to go take a peek at their second step and say, where do we need to focus? You do not need to go grab something new. You need to use what you have. Because remember, kids already had that basic information, and so did families. And so it might be like Stacy Landon, it might be like you're going to say, I'm going to actually post on my website for families so they can see, here's what our teaching schedule looks like. So those same new skill sets can be recognized and practiced and acknowledged at home settings. So we encourage you right now, keep screening, engage in professional learning opportunities on this, and definitely make sure we're not using screening data just by itself. And then for teachers, when they screen, like if Christine was a teacher and let's say she pulled up her screening data after the fall time point, and if she looked at her data and found that like more than 20% of her kids had higher than average behavior challenges, she is not going to start by farming all those kids out. She's going to start by asking herself, what is the smallest shift I can make in how I am teaching to support kids being there and engaged and minimizing disruption? So it's a shift in teacher behavior first. And that's why people are asking us, should I screen? Absolutely yes. But right now in your districts, usually there's a 4 to 6 weeks window. And we encourage you, pick a date towards the end of that window. Get closer to 6 weeks than the 4, especially if you are in these various situations. And then perhaps most importantly, listen to this last recommendation: screen responsibly. And by that, I mean, there's a whole lot of other screening tools out there. We're only talking about teacher completed screening tools right now. You do want to rely on multiple sources of information, but if you are going to ask families to screen, meaning parents to fill out a rating scale on their child or a student to complete it, you have to be ready to respond. If a teacher fills out a behavior screening, there are mandated reporters. If they already suspected that there was a challenge with kids, like either hurting themselves or being hurt by somebody else, they would have reported that. If you are bringing in new information from other sources, like from families, from the students themselves, you cannot sit on that. You have to be prepared to respond to it, meaning, do you have the resources to do that? And we also have to be careful of not alienating the people that we're trying to support right now. So trust is a fragile thing. So collect the information that you can use. If you already have screening tools in place, then continue to engage in professional learning on those topics. And on our website, you'll also find there's a new brief at the very top of that page. There's like a little green box, and it talks about recommendations for screening. Oh, thank you. That's perfect, Katie. And if you click on that little blue box, and I encourage you to read this because we're getting a lot of questions right now that are important to your equity work. And that first recommendation is, remember that screening itself is important for promoting the equity of the educational experiences, because you're using those data with other data as collected as part of regular school supports to inform instruction. Some people have parents that really know how to negotiate the system. Screening allows you to systematically check 3 times a year to see who needs more. And then we use that to shape instruction. And it's not just about saying a kid has an issue, it might be the system does. The second thing is, remember, if you choose not to screen, you miss the fact that screening actually predicts really important outcomes for kids. We know right now that under normal circumstances, those fall screenings predict how many office discipline referrals kids are going to get. It predicts the number of days they're going to be suspended. It predicts attendance patterns. It predicts the number of referrals to a nurse's office at the elementary level. It predicts oral reading fluency scores at the end of the year. At middle and high school, it predicts grade point average, and it predicts the number of classes kids will fail. So I can tell you, if you choose to not screen, you will be waiting for those kids to have all those really harsh outcomes, and then we start responding. And truth, like by the time a kid has earned 6 office discipline referrals, or 4 or 14, sometimes people feel less than constructive. And I have to tell you, my biggest concern as a mother and as a researcher is the kids with internalizing issues. Because if you do not screen, systematically look for them, we will miss those kids, because they don't go on to earn things like office discipline referrals. And some systems rely on the number of office discipline referrals to move kids through the tiers. And while that was a great starting point, we know these work. And questions often have come up now about, okay, with everything that's happening in the world, is this appropriate? Like, people want to know about, like, is this a biased set of scores? And I want you to know that is one of the blessings of what we have going right now. For Project Screen, we actually had plans before all of this happening to do what is called bias analyses. In addition to confirming and expanding on the predictive validity, we want to know, do those scores function differently for boys and girls, for kids that are white or black or Hispanic? And we want to know, are there differences in those items? And if there is bias, it needs to be addressed. And so we already had plans to do those analyses. In addition to reliability and validity, was also going to be bias analyses. And so some people are thinking, should we keep going while we're doing those analyses? And I would say absolutely yes, because we know those scores predict the outcomes for kids.